The Desert Inn showroom was packed on a Saturday night in July 1967. Every table occupied, every seat filled, the kind of crowd that made Las Vegas feel like the center of the universe. Dean Martin was 3 songs into his set, the audience hanging on every note, every joke, every casual gesture that made performing look like the easiest thing in the world. That's when the money started flying. Not coins, not singles. $100 bills, crisp and green, sailing through the air like confetti, landing on the stage at Dean's feet, scattering across the polished wood floor. Dean stopped singing mid-verse. The band, confused, kept playing for a few bars before trailing off into silence. The audience shifted uncomfortably, not sure if this was part of the show or something else entirely. Dean looked down at the bills littering the stage. Then he looked up, following the trajectory back to its source. Front row center table. Anthony Fat Tony Benedetto, all 280 pounds of him, standing with a wad of cash in his meaty hand, grinning like he'd just done something clever. His crew, 4 men in expensive suits who looked like they'd been carved from the same block of granite, sat around him, watching their boss perform. "Come on, Dean." Tony's voice boomed across the showroom, thick with a Philadelphia accent and too much scotch. "Dance for me. Earn your money. You're just an entertainer, right? A monkey in a tuxedo." He threw another handful of bills. They fluttered through the spotlight beam like wounded birds before settling among the others. The showroom went completely silent. This wasn't heckling. This wasn't even disrespect. This was something uglier. This was a man with power and money trying to remind everyone, especially Dean Martin, exactly where they stood in the hierarchy of things. Tony Benedetto wasn't just some tourist with too much cash and too little class. He was connected. Philadelphia mob, with ties that stretched from the East Coast to Vegas and back. He owned restaurants, trucking companies, unions. He had judges on payroll and cops in his pocket. When Tony Benedetto walked into a room, people noticed. When he threw money around, it wasn't generosity, it was a demonstration. "Look what I can do. Look what I can make you do." Dean stood perfectly still on the stage, looking at Tony. His face showed nothing. Not anger, not embarrassment, not fear. Just that sleepy-eyed Dean Martin expression that could mean anything or nothing. The audience waited. The band waited. Even Tony's crew seemed to sense that something was happening that wasn't in the script. Then Dean moved. He bent down and picked up a $100 bill, then another, then another. Methodically, calmly, he walked around the stage, collecting every bill Tony had thrown. The audience watched in complete silence. Some people looked embarrassed for Dean, some looked angry at Tony, some just looked confused. Dean gathered the last bill, straightened up, and counted the money carefully. His lips moved silently. When he finished, he looked up at Tony. $2,000, Dean said into the microphone. His voice was calm, conversational, like he was commenting on the weather. "That's very generous of you, Tony." Tony grinned wider, thinking he'd won. "That's right, Dean. That's what you're worth. $2,000 to dance for Fat Tony." Dean smiled. That particular Dean Martin smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "No, Tony, that's what you just donated, because I'm not keeping this." Dean walked to the edge of the stage right, where the waitresses entered and exited through a small doorway. He gestured to one of them, a young woman in her 20s who'd frozen mid-service when the money started flying. "But, could you come here for a second?" Maria approached hesitantly, clutching her serving tray like a shield. She was pretty in that Vegas waitress way. Hair styled perfectly, makeup careful, smile practiced. But up close, you could see the exhaustion around her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, and Dean held out the money. "Maria, this is for you." She stared at the cash like it might bite her. "Mr. Martin, I can't." "Yes, you can. In fact, you have to, because I'm not taking it." Dean pressed the bills into her hand, closing her fingers around them gently. "I know you're working 2 jobs. I know you've got 2 kids at home. I know your car broke down last week and you've been taking the bus. This should help." Maria's eyes filled with tears. "How did you—" "I talk to people, sweetheart. I pay attention." Dean turned back to the audience, keeping his hand on Maria's shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Maria Gonzalez. She works here at the Desert Inn 6 nights a week. Then she goes to the Sands and works breakfast shift 4 mornings a week. She's raising 2 kids by herself because her husband died in Vietnam last year. She deserves this money more than I do." The audience erupted in applause. Not polite applause, but the real thing. People standing, clapping, some of them crying. Maria stood there shaking, holding $2,000, overwhelmed. Dean walked her back to the side of the stage, whispered something to her that made her smile through her tears, then turned back to face Tony Benedetto. The applause died down. Everyone wanted to see what happened next. Dean walked to the edge of the stage, right above Tony's table. He looked down at the mob boss, who was no longer grinning. "See, Tony, when you throw money at people, you're trying to make them feel small. You're trying to demonstrate power. You're saying, I'm rich and you're not. I'm important and you're not. I can make you do things because I have money and you need money." Dean's voice was still calm, still conversational, but something in it had sharpened. "But here's what just happened. You threw $2,000 at me to humiliate me, and I turned it into $2,000 for a widow with 2 kids. So now everyone in this room thinks you're a generous man who just helped a struggling mother. They think you have a heart. They think you did something good." Dean paused, let it sink in. "You're welcome, Tony. I just made you look like a decent human being. That's probably the best $2,000 you've ever spent." The audience laughed. Not nervous laughter, but real laughter, the kind that comes from tension breaking and justice being served. Tony's face had gone from confident to confused to angry. He started to stand, his crew moving with him, but one of his own men, an older guy, probably a consigliere, put a hand on Tony's arm and whispered something urgent in his ear. Tony hesitated. You could see the calculation happening. He could make a scene, could escalate, could try to save face with violence or threats. But that would just prove Dean's point, would make him look like exactly what Dean had subtly suggested: he was a bully who needed money to feel powerful. Or he could sit down, smile, and pretend it was all in good fun. Tony sat down. The smile he forced onto his face looked painful. "Good sport, Dean," he said, loud enough to be heard. "Good sport." Dean nodded. "Glad you see it that way, Tony. Now, if you don't mind, I've got a show to finish." He walked back to center stage, picked up the microphone, and nodded to the band. "Where were we? Oh, right. I was in the middle of Ain't that a kick in the head?" Which seems appropriate, all things considered. The audience roared with laughter. The band launched back into the song, and Dean Martin performed the rest of his set like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just publicly outmaneuvered a mob boss while simultaneously helping a struggling widow. Backstage after the show, Dean's manager Herman was beside himself. "Are you insane? Do you know who Tony Benedetto is?" Dean was taking off his bow tie, pouring himself a real drink now that the performance was over. "Yeah, I know who he is. He's the guy who just gave $2,000 to Maria." "Dean, this isn't a joke. Tony's connected. Philadelphia family. He's killed people." "For throwing money at me?" Dean looked at Herman. "Come on. Even the mob has PR to worry about. What's he going to do? Whack me for giving his money to a war widow?" "That's a great story. Mob boss murders entertainer for helping veteran's widow." The headlines write themselves. Herman sat down, rubbing his temples. "You're going to get yourself killed one of these days." "We're all going to get killed one of these days. Might as well do some good while we're here." There was a knock at the dressing room door. Herman tensed. Dean called out, "It's open." The door opened. Tony Benedetto stood there, alone this time. No crew, no muscle, just him. Herman moved to position himself between Tony and Dean, but Dean waved him off. "It's fine, Herman. Give us a minute." Herman left reluctantly, closing the door behind him but staying right outside in the hallway. Tony looked at Dean. Dean looked at Tony. The silence stretched out. "That was a hell of a move," Tony said finally. His voice was different now, quieter, without the performance of earlier. "I came here to bust your balls, show off in front of my guys, and you turned it around on me. I just gave your money to someone who needed it more," Dean said simply. "No big deal." "It was a big deal. You made me look like a schmuck in front of a room full of people." "No, I made you look like a generous man who helped a widow. There's a difference." Tony shook his head slowly. You're a smart guy, Dean. Smarter than I gave you credit for. I thought you were just another pretty face singing songs, but you're something else. I'm a guy who doesn't like bullies, that's all. I'm not a bully, Tony said, but there was no conviction in it. Yeah, you are. You came to my show, threw money at me, tried to make me dance for you. That's bullying. You were trying to prove you had power over me, that your money could make me do things. Dean poured a second drink, offered it to Tony. Tony took it. But here's the thing, Tony. You don't have power over me. You have money, sure. You have connections, sure. But you don't have power over what I do or how I respond. I took your money and gave it to someone who needed it. I took your attempt to humiliate me and turned it into something good. That's my power. Tony drank the whiskey in one shot. You cost me respect in there, in front of everyone. No, you cost yourself respect when you threw money at me like I was a stripper. I just didn't let you get away with it. They stood in silence for a moment. Tony set down the empty glass. The waitress, Maria, she really got 2 kids. Yeah, husband was a Marine, killed in Hugh City in February. She's been working herself to death, trying to keep her kids fed and her rent paid. $2,000 will help, but it won't last forever. Tony was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his wallet, counted out another 2,000 in hundreds, and set it on Dean's dressing room table. Give her this too. But don't tell her it's from me. Just tell her it's from someone who appreciates veterans' families. Dean looked at the money, then at Tony. Why? Because you're right. I was being a bully. And maybe I don't want to be just that. My old man was in World War I. He came back messed up, never really recovered. My mother worked herself to death taking care of him and us kids. So maybe, he trailed off, shrugged, just give her the money. Dean picked up the cash. I'll make sure she gets it. Tony headed for the door, then stopped. Dean, we're square, you and me. What happened out there, we're past it. But do me a favor. Don't ever make me look stupid again. Next time, just tell me I'm being an ass in private. I can take it from you, but not in front of a room full of people. My reputation's all I got. Dean nodded. Fair enough. But Tony, stop throwing money at people. It doesn't make you look powerful. It makes you look insecure. Tony's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He just left, closing the door behind him. Herman burst back in immediately. What happened? What did he say? Dean held up the second $2,000. He said Maria needs this too. Herman stared. He gave you more money? Turns out Fat Tony's got a mother who struggled. Sometimes all it takes is reminding people of their own story. The next morning, Maria Gonzalez showed up for her shift at the Sands and found an envelope waiting for her. Inside was $4,000 cash and a note written in Dean's handwriting. Maria, this is from people who appreciate what your husband did for this country. Use it to take care of yourself and your kids. You've earned it. Minus Dean. Maria cried for 10 minutes in the employee bathroom. Then she went to work, but her shift supervisor noticed something different about her. The weight she'd been carrying seemed lighter. 2 weeks later, she put a down payment on a reliable car. She quit her second job at the Sands, started getting 6 hours of sleep a night instead of 4. Her kids noticed their mum smiled more, stressed less. She wrote Dean a letter, simple, heartfelt, thanking him for his kindness. Dean kept the letter in his dressing room for years. The story of what happened that night at the Desert Inn spread through Las Vegas within 24 hours. Not the version Tony wanted told, but the real version. Dean Martin had been publicly humiliated by a mob boss throwing money at him, and instead of losing his temper or his dignity, he'd turned it into an act of charity that made the mob boss look good despite his intentions. Other entertainers heard the story and felt something shift. For years, they'd accepted that mob guys would come to shows and flex their power, would make demands, would treat performers like servants, would demonstrate their superiority through money and intimidation. But Dean had shown there was another way. You didn't have to accept the humiliation. You could redirect it. You could take the weapon someone tried to use against you and turn it into something that helped someone else. Tony Benedetto never threw money at another performer again. Word got around that he'd been outsmarted by Dean Martin, that his power move had been turned into a charity donation. Some guys in his circle thought it was funny. Others respected that Tony had taken the L and moved on. But Tony himself was changed by it in a way nobody expected. 6 months later, he started quietly donating to veterans organizations. Not publicizing it, not making a show of it, just sending money to groups that helped families of soldiers killed in Vietnam. When someone in his crew asked him about it, Tony said, "My old man was a veteran. My mother struggled. Maybe I should have thought about that before I acted like a big shot throwing money around." In 1969, Dean was doing an interview for a magazine. The interviewer asked about the incident with Tony Benedetto, which had become something of a legend by then. "Why did you give the money to Maria instead of keeping it?" the interviewer asked. Dean thought about it for a moment. "Because keeping it would have meant Tony won. He threw that money to humiliate me, to demonstrate that he had power over me. If I kept it, if I danced for it, if I let it affect how I performed, then he would have won. His money would have controlled me. But by giving it away, I took his weapon and turned it into something good. He tried to use money to make someone feel small, and I used that same money to help someone who actually needed it. That's not me being generous, that's me refusing to be controlled." Dean paused, took a sip of his drink. "And here's the thing people don't understand. Tony wasn't the real audience for what I did. Maria was. All those waitresses and dealers and valets and janitors who make Vegas work, they were the real audience. They see rich guys throw money around all the time. They see people treated like servants. They see power demonstrated through humiliation. And you wanted to show them. I wanted to show them that you don't have to accept it. That dignity isn't something someone can buy from you or take from you. That you can take someone's attempt to control you and turn it into something that helps someone else." The interviewer scribbled notes. "Do you think it changed anything, long term?" Dean shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe Tony thinks twice before he treats people like property. Maybe some waitress who saw what happened knows she doesn't have to accept being treated badly. Maybe someone in that audience who has power decides to use it differently. Or maybe it was just one night, one moment, one small thing that didn't change anything." He smiled. "But it helped Maria and her kids. So even if it didn't change the world, it changed their world, and that's enough." In 1975, Maria Gonzalez's son graduated from college. He was the first person in his family to get a degree. At the graduation ceremony, Maria told him the story of the night Dean Martin gave her $4,000 that changed everything. How it let her quit her second job, get reliable transportation, stop living in constant panic about making rent. How it gave her breathing room to be a better mother, to help with homework, to be present instead of exhausted. Her son asked if she'd ever thanked Dean Martin properly. "I wrote him a letter," Maria said, "but I don't think words can really express what he did. It wasn't just the money. It was the dignity. He didn't make me feel like charity. He made me feel like I deserved help, like my husband's service mattered, like I mattered." Her son thought about that for a moment. "When I'm successful, when I'm making good money, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to help people the way Dean Martin helped us." "That would make him happy," Maria said. "That would make his kindness multiply." Maria's son became a lawyer. He did pro bono work for veterans' families, helped them navigate VA benefits, fought for disability claims. He never charged military families for his services. When people asked why, he told them about the night Dean Martin gave his mother $4,000 and changed their lives. That's how these things spread. Not through grand gestures or public campaigns, but through one person helping another, who then helps another, who then helps another. A chain of kindness that starts with someone refusing to accept how things are and choosing instead to make them how they should be. Dean Martin died in 1995. At his funeral, among the hundreds of people who showed up to pay respects, there was an older woman with 2 adult children. They'd driven from San Diego. They stood in line for an hour to pay their respects. When they reached Dean's daughter, Deanna, the woman introduced herself. "I'm Maria Gonzalez. Your father helped me once in 1967. I never got to thank him properly. But I wanted you to know that what he did that night changed my life, changed my children's lives. My son is a lawyer now. My daughter is a teacher. And neither of them would be who they are if your father hadn't given me that money and that dignity when I needed it most." Dinasa hugged her. He would have been happy to know that. He never talked much about the things he did for people, but I know it mattered to him. It mattered to us, Maria said. It still matters. That's the real story of the night Fat Tony Benedetto threw money at Dean Martin on stage. Not about a mob boss getting outsmarted, though that happened. Not about a clever comeback, though that happened too. But about what happens when someone with a platform and power chooses to use both to help someone who needs it. When they refuse to accept humiliation and instead transform it into something that changes lives. Tony threw $2,000 at Dean to make him dance, to demonstrate power, to humiliate. Dean picked it up and gave it to a widow. Then Tony, challenged to be better than his worst instincts, gave another $4,000 that helped Maria quit her second job, get reliable transportation, be present for her kids, $4,000 that led to college degrees and careers, and a son who helps veterans' families for free because he remembers what help meant to his own family. That's not just a good story. That's proof that how we respond to cruelty matters, that dignity can't be bought or sold, that taking someone's weapon and turning it into someone else's help is one of the most powerful things you can do. Dean Martin made it look easy, like everything else he did. But it wasn't easy. It was a choice to not accept how things were, a choice to redirect cruelty into kindness, a choice to help someone who needed it with money that was meant to hurt. In the end, that's what made Dean Martin more than just an entertainer. He was a man who understood that fame and power and talent mean nothing if you don't use them to make things better for people who have none of those things. Fat Tony learned that lesson. Maria Gonzalez lived it. Her children carried it forward. And decades later, people still tell the story of the night money was thrown on a stage as an insult and picked up as an opportunity to help. That's not cool. That's not smooth. That's not the effortless Dean Martin persona. That's something better. That's human decency elevated to art. That's kindness performed with such precision that it looks like magic. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real performance Dean Martin gave that night. Not the songs, though they were great, but the demonstration that dignity is something you choose, not something someone else can take from you. And that sometimes the best way to beat a bully is to take their weapon and use it to help someone they never even saw.